Hello, my name is Dr. Mallory Everett, and I am privileged to be able to tell my story today and just share some of my thoughts. Let me start off by saying I'm a Lutheran and I'm proud to be one. My journey starts with a young Black girl growing up in the urban community of Queens, Jamaica, Queens, New York, in fact, where I had two parents and a sister. And although we were not financially robust, we had a lot of love and a lot of faith. Through my time and my journey of going to school and engaging in many different communities, I have been faced with hardships just simply because of the color of my skin. Being the only Black female in my doctorate program, I was faced with many systematic, overt, and covert experiences of racism that I can trace back to the time of growing up in Jamaica, Queens, New York. My parents had to sacrifice to send me to schools outside of my neighborhood due to the fact that the ones in my neighborhood were not up to standard and were not up to par for me to be able to compete, therefore putting financial hardship on them to be able to accomplish a goal, which is me sitting here today as a psychologist. I think back about influences which the church that I grew up and still attend, New Hope Lutheran Church in Jamaica, Queens, was such an essential part of my upbringing. It was such a critical nature. I had not only biological family members that attended the church, but I had extended family members that morphed into just the crust of who I am. From weekly, I felt like we were there day in and day out, learning and growing and supporting one another, and it was just filled with love. But I can honestly say, through all the times and the challenges and the tribulations that were happening in the society, I can't quite remember the church and the faith having a strong sense of a stance either way. Within my church, I would say that we supported and we talked about trials and tribulations and struggles of what it means to be a Black person in America, but I don't remember it being a sense of a mandate from the overall Lutheran faith, which I believe is a disservice. I want to talk a little bit about the critical nature of being an ally. An ally is not necessarily a person that consistently, starts or is in front of the movement. An ally could be a person that sees a wrongdoing and stands up in the way that they feel is genuine to them. I would tell you that throughout my experience and throughout my journey, I've been faced with many systematic experiences of racism, and it could be something as small as me going to the grocery store, which this incident happened 3 weeks ago, and I was treated so differently than the counterpart in front of me who happened to be a white male. That experience and those microaggressions that continuously happen over your lifetime has such a in-depth psychological impact on the way at which you value yourself. And so therefore, being a person within a structure, within a religious faith, and you don't hear that faith standing in a strong position against such injustices, what does that do to you and the value that you place, or the value that you think that your faith places on your well-being? It was not until I was asked to talk about my journey and my life experiences that I reflected on that. I think, we talk about the love of God, right? And how He loves I remember one of the first books, my father was a Sunday school teacher, and he was my Sunday school teacher, and he bought this book that I still have till this day, and it stated the title, "I Must Be Special Because I Was Designed by God." And that was the imagery and the messages that I got from that very young child in Jamaica, Queens. But that came from my core unit. And as I think about the extended umbrella of the Lutheran faith and the stance and the intentionality of that, was that continued? So when we reflect and we're doing movements such as this, which I think is really important, I want us to really think about it not just being for the moment, but for a movement. A movement is not in the times. Us watching the persistent violence against people of color and wanting to stand out and do something, sparked recently by the incidents of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I think it's really, really important. But I don't want it to just be for a moment. I know that it needs to be for a movement. Through my resilience and my faith and my family, it's the reason why I sit here today through all the experience that I've had. But I've been faced with so many discriminatory incidents, from being in school and having someone tell me there were only a certain number of schools or a certain location of schools that I should apply to. Being in my doctorate program and being told that I was demanding because I was assertive, and really being able to command my own intelligence and stand steadfast in my own beliefs. It's connected to that idea that a Black person should not be confident within their value system and the value that society places on them. And if we sit by and not speak as a church to that injustice, what does our silence say? And honestly, it wasn't until I was approached to do this that I really reflected on that. How does that impact, that lack thereof, of fellowship behind genuine concern for people of color and their well-being in our collective of faith goers, impact my connection to faith? If you are my brother and my sister in Christ, yet you question my value, or you question someone not treating me well, what does that speak? How do I feel welcomed? If I am a person growing up as I was and not seeing in high levels within the church system people that look like me, where were my role models? If there was no faith that there were qualified people of color to hold high positionings within the church. So I think back that sometimes we believe that racism only exists when you see horrific incidents of a Breonna Taylor or a George Floyd, and neglect to highlight those daily microaggressions that chip away at your psychological well-being, where you have to question if you're going to be able to leave your home and return safely. I am a productive member of society, a faith embedded person, and I still have to question every interaction that I have outside to make sure and to confirm that I return home safely. What level of angst does that put on a person, and how do you function? Is that sustainable? And that is the question that I think when we talk about being an ally, we should be considering for our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. What is their journey day in and day out, and how do we increase our empathy, and not just our empathy, but our action? And the action can be small moments in time, that you make it a priority to make it your business. Not in sectors, not saying that the church is not where this belongs in political talks, right? Because we always hear that, like it should be a separation of church and state. But it cannot be a separation of church and state when the very essence and the well-being of my brother and my sister in Christ is in jeopardy. It cannot be a separation when I know that they are suffering from the pressure and the lack of feeling supported. So when I think about a place such as my church that has contributed to the person that sits in front of you, I think of the broader umbrella, the crust, the foundational piece, which is the Lutheran faith, and how do we progress and move forward and be reminded that God's love is not for certain people. God's love is for all people. So my journey from overt and covert racism, from being questioned about my intelligence, questions about my intentionality, questioned about my ability, feelings of having to work beyond measure to prove my value, being stopped with no justification just because of the color of my skin, having to worry if I go to the grocery store and come back, if I'm going to make it back home to my family, having to worry about my loved ones within my family, if they're going to make it back home, not because of the actions that they engage in, but simply for the very essence of being Black. The first thing of a coping mechanism that I often tell my faith-based patients is leaning on prayer, and that prayer changes things. But I also believe that not only prayer changes, but people change things. God gave us the wisdom and discernment to reach out to the resources that's in front of us. And as people, a resource that's critical, and I know it's critical in my life, is the church. And so I believe that it is necessary for the church to take a very strong, active role in having a voice and making a change. And I also believe that it is a part of the church's mission to not make this a moment, but a movement. So yes, I've had many experiences from simply trying to expand and just evolve as a person and being questioned solely for the essence of me being a Black woman. They don't define me. They do contribute to my perspective, but they don't define me. And my faith is what continues to push me to move forward. I appreciate the opportunity, and I leave you with a couple of questions. First one, how do you show up for your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ? How do you make it your business? Not when you're outside of church, but all the time. How do you show up as an ally? The next one is to consider how your fellow brothers and sisters of Christ who are people of color are impacted by the church's silence on critical issues that consider the value of their life. And if you feel as if there is an essential impact, how do you make that impact a positive one? Thirdly, what change can you do to your individual value system that will impact the persistence of violence and injustice against people of color. I leave you with this. Prayer changes things, but so do people. Thank you so much for your time.